Well, good afternoon. So I got a new addition to the tool family. Yeah, I got an addiction, and I think it's called ADOM, Attention Deficit. Oh, machinery. Anyways, Facebook Marketplace, it'll be my downfall one day, but I just can't say no to these wonderful bargains, and some of it's a bit of a puzzle. Anyways, I picked up yesterday, actually, a table saw. The guy wanted $300 for it, and he said he made it quite clear. He says when he presses the power button, all it does is go and then shuts the breaker off. So I'm thinking to myself, well, what on earth could that be? You know, if it's not running, it's probably the start capacitor or something like that. So I bought it. I just said, yeah, for $300, it's definitely worth it. It's 3 horsepower. It's got a magnetic starter on it. It's got a T-square fence on it. So all of it's of good value. So I'll show you what it is, and I'm going to show you the motor because I took it off, and I'm going to go check to see what's actually wrong with it before I send it out to the motor shop possibly. So hopefully it's as simple as like just a wire or something like that. You just never know. Okay, so take a look at this for a second. All right, so here's the machine. It's King Industrial. It's a left-hand tilt, which is kind of cool. So that in itself is worth something. Magnetic starter. That obviously must have been replaced at some point because it's a General. And here's all the inner workings here. So these things are just basically a reproduction of the Delta or the Rockwell table saw that's been made for the last 50 years. So they're pretty simple as far as that goes. But here's the T-square fence. It's got a piece of, it looks like a piece of Corey on top of that. So that's got to go. And I'll put new sides on here and get that running. And it's also missing a cursor right there. So that is the other thing. And here's the thing. Go look for a cursor for one of these things. Not an easy thing to find. So if anybody has a source for that, could you please let me know? Because so far I haven't found anything that's of any value. So the machine looks like it was worked reasonably hard. Don't know what the condition of the bearings are, but that's not a huge job if I did have to replace the bearings on this thing. So anyways, I'm going to take a look at the motor and see where I'm at. So I took off the cap from the, this is the start capacitor right here. It says for motor starting. And it looks like this one was replaced at one time because he did say that he had it replaced. But here's the interesting thing. Take a look at this. Okay. Make sure I don't touch the ends. It had no cover. Let me turn this around. It had no cover on the end of it. It should have one of these things on the end of it here. So this end of the capacitor was touching the inside of the box. So it was basically shorting out the whole motor here and wouldn't allow it to start. Because I was always wondering why, like when I was there, you know, you press the button and all you do is hear a humming. If the start capacitor was gone, I don't think you'd hear anything as far as I'm concerned. So that kind of part of it didn't make sense. But now everything makes sense because this thing was actually shorting itself out on the motor, which in itself actually makes it a little bit on the dangerous side if you think about it. But anyways, problem solved. And now I can move on to getting this thing put back together. Here's another thing. These things were full of sawdust. And one of the reasons was these screws were never tightened down properly. You know, every time I do one of these things, I learn just something a little bit more about how these things work. Not only the mechanicals, but like on the electrical side as well. And I can't tell you how invaluable that is, actually having, you know, at least a rudimentary understanding of how this thing works. All right, so I'm going to give it another test and see how it works. So go figure. I got this thing, I plugged it in and I dropped the motor. I had it sitting on a little table, only maybe about 1.5 feet off of the ground, and I busted part of this off. Now I re-glued it with oh darn man, that gets me so upset. But anyways, I put JB Weld on here, and yeah, I put the base back on. I'm hoping that's going to be good enough to run it. I think I'm just going to run a file over this when I start it up again. But in all honesty, I was wondering if this thing would actually start or not, and it did, and it just jumped off of that table and landed on here. So I'm going to run this thing to see if it works. Otherwise, I have to get a whole new pulley for this dumb thing. What a dingus! All right, so this is the mat I should have had underneath the thing before I had plugged it in the last time. All right, let's get this going and see if I can't clean that JB Weld up. Okay, well, that's not that bad. Okay, when you look down it, you know, I'm going to run this thing and test it out. If I don't like it, put a new pulley on. All right, so I got tired of looking around to see if I could find a cursor for that the table saw. So here's my plan. I've had this sheet of plexiglass for probably a couple of decades, 20 years. And I use it occasionally for little bits. If I got to make a router base or whatever, I use this stuff. But so here's what I did. I cut 2 pieces that are about 2 1/4 by 1 1/4 by 1/4 inch thick. And here's the plan. I'm gonna bond these two together with some of this epoxy here. So I'm gonna mix up a bit of epoxy. I'm gonna scrape this down, sand it a little bit, and then try to overlay it with about 1/4 inch of overlap, kind of thing, like that. And hopefully I can bond them together. And this is what I'm gonna use to make a cursor and drill a couple of holes in it and mount it to the table saw. So I'm gonna see how this actually works. Put that over top. I think it's just 120 grit sandpaper. I squeezed out a little bit of silicone or epoxy here. Yeah, let's see how this works. All right. Okay, let's see how this works. I'll just put that down like so. Something about there. I think that'll do it. I'll let it sit overnight, see what it looks like in the morning. All right, so that actually turned out pretty good. That's nice and strong. Better than I thought anyways. So a little bit of glue squeeze out here. I think I can get most of that off with utility. Yep, there it comes. There we are. Okay, so I've marked a center point in here, and my plan is to do this. Just mark a line across it if I can, without cutting my fingers off. And I want to try to get that in best I can into the center. Because I've looked at the cursors I have on my other saws, and basically it's just a line, like a red line. So here's my thought. Okay, so there we have it. Got a little line and a sharp A. Let's see how this works. Looks pretty good. Now I got to drill a couple of little holes on the top side here so I can slide around, and I think I'm good to go. All right, so I marked it off. In all honesty, this is actually an extra one that I made because I have another table saw fence and I needed to make one for it. So this is what that one's going for. I actually made two of these, and one is on the saw, but this is basically the same way I made the other one. When I knew it was going to work, it was like, oh yeah, this is fabulous. So this really only takes, it took me maybe 10 minutes to make this thing. Is it worth making one of these things? Yeah, I think so, because now I can specifically drill these holes exactly where I need them to be, as opposed to buying something that you never know what you're going to get, I guess. Because I'm finding it like getting exact parts for machinery, especially ones that are older, man, it's getting harder and harder all the time, and you got to learn to make some of this stuff yourself. There, how do you like that? Quick way to elongate a hole. All right, so what I want to show you here is, this is actually very, very critical on your saw. If you want to use your miter slot gauge like this, you have to make sure that your blade is absolutely parallel with that guide. Otherwise, let's say your table is off by a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch, one way or the other, like that. Well, just picture you going through there with the guide. It's going to hit the front blades first, your cut, and as it comes through, if it's pinching this way, the back side of your cut is going to start scraping on the back side of these teeth here. So meaning, as it comes through, this is going to start hitting, and you're going to get an uneven cut. And what happens is it pushes your miter out, or your straight cut, whatever you're doing. It doesn't matter, regardless if you're using a sled or a miter slot or a miter gauge, it's going to happen that way. So the easiest way to do it is get yourself a long straight edge like this. Crank the blade up as high as it'll go, and make sure that this thing is touching the body of the blade, not the teeth. Okay, so I'm going like this, and I can feel it's just touching the body of the blade, not the teeth. Then take your tape measure, hook it on, and measure, or push it in tight. So here, okay, put that tight, 5.5 inches, 5.5 inches. So it's exactly the way it should be. And that is so critical, because once you line that up, then you can line up your fence from there. Because you know exactly that this thing is going to line up with your miter slots. So this fence, I haven't touched anything on it. I'm going to set it for 9 1/4 here. Okay, so 9 1/4. Check on the back side. It's off by about a 1/16 of an inch. So this thing, I have to tilt over just slightly that way by 1/16 of an inch. And where you adjust that is on your fence right here. Okay, so if you look at the underside here, you see these little pawls right here. They're you can move them around with this little grub screw right here. And this thing has never been moved from what I see. So I find that this fence was a little bit too loose in the first place. So I'm going to readjust that by just raising those things in and out to get this to line up. And you can just visually see it when you look at the gap going here. So who's ever using this saw, their cut was actually pinching just slightly on the blade, on the back side of the blade right there. It must have been quite frustrating when they were ripping through. It'd always have that feeling of a kickback. So I've adjusted it by adjusting that grub screw here and there. And you can see it's just open just ever so slightly here. Now this side was open just a little bit more. More than likely when this fence was made, it was just slightly askew when they welded this whole thing together, which doesn't surprise me. But you can make that adjustment. But the thing is, you don't want to just crank that thing wide open, because then all you're doing is getting contact just one spot here, which is not good. In reality, this thing should actually be able to find some way of making this parallel all the way across so it doesn't rub unevenly. But now everything is completely set now to that actual miter slot, which is parallel with the blade. So that's why it's important to have all of those things kind of in concert together. So I'll show you the last thing I did with this fence. So it had a large piece of plastic on top, and I actually thought this was Corian, but it wasn't. But it's a super slick plastic, but it was about 5.5 inches tall. So I actually split it in half and then bored new holes in here for the screws, and then I added a small block right here, okay, because this thing used to have this long bolt with a little pad that would that move along with that angle iron. But I don't like that way of doing it, in all honesty, because what happens is if there's, let's say, a piece of wood that gets stuck in your angle iron and your table, well, this thing bumps up against it and it becomes a problem. So I took a piece of that leftover plastic and I screwed it to the underside of the fence here, and it's up about a 32nd to just under 1/16 of an inch. And it rests now on the table in the back there. So when it goes down, now it can slide and it goes right over top of the miter slots with no problem. And there's what the new cursor looks like. And it works just beautiful. So the inside on the trunnions and gears, last night I sprayed WD underneath here just to get everything that was all kind of clogged up just kind of loose. So I'm going to take it and get the blower on here, blow everything out, and then apply just a light machine oil underneath here. So you do not ever want to use grease on here. You'll only want to use a light machine oil for these gears, because otherwise things get gummed up. So I figured I didn't like the condition of the extension table here. So I got a piece of old laminate that's been kicking around in the shop probably for over 15 years. Actually had all kinds of mouse pee all over it. Anyways, I'm not going to tell anybody about that. But anyways, I'm going to put that on here just to make it look a little bit prettier. All right, so I've coated both sides with 3M spray adhesive. This stuff works pretty good. Okay. So if you've ever done laminate before, it's not that difficult. It's all about getting your positioning, making sure that that's right. So I'm just butting up to the metal of the extension here. There we go. Biggest thing is just get around your outside edges, your perimeter. That's the most important thing. So I've got my trimmer here, and I do a bearingless trimmer for doing stuff like this where it's not in contact with any other laminate. I used to use this a lot when I did laminate for doing P-lam countertops and that kind of thing. For side splashes, this thing was just invaluable. Beautiful! There we go. Can't even tell a mouse peed on here. All right, here we go. Finished product. Check this out. I'm happy with the way that turned out. Look at this. This thing just works like a dream. Gotta love it.